it is not a good time for the United States to be led by a president in obvious decline, physically and mentally. Biden yesterday started a 3-day trip to the Middle East to tackle some of these tensions, particularly with Iran, which is another Russia-China ally in a sort of axis of evil, with Iran developing nuclear capability, potentially a bomb. Biden landed first in Israel and immediately looked, as soon as he got off the plane, looked confused about where to go, what to do. Biden then kicked off with a speech about the Holocaust that included an absolute clanger.
To honor 6 million Jewish lives were stolen in the genocide and continue, which we must do every day, continue to bear witness. To keep alive the truth and honor of the Holocaust, horror of the Holocaust.
Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired 4-star general and former Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, great to talk to you again. What is Joe Biden trying to achieve with this trip to Israel and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, this administration, when they came in 2021, they strategically were completely misguided in their approach to the Middle East. As opposed to taking advantage of Trump's maximum sanctions, the Abraham Accords, which is a renewed relationship between the Arabs and the Israelis, and also all the progress that had been made in countering Iran. What did the Biden administration do? They went out and appeased Iran right away. They stopped enforcing some of the Trump sanctions, and they stiffed the Saudi Arabia and the UAE in terms of arms deals that we had made with them. They absolutely damaged seriously the relationship that the previous administration had established. So much of this is about resetting the relationship, renewing the relationship, particularly with the kingdom. And the main issue on the table is, everybody's talking about it's oil, but the main issue on the table is really, how do we counter Iran? And certainly they're going to Israel first before they're going to the Gulf states. And that is a huge issue. And the Arabs are questioning, Andrew, whether the United States is really serious about the relationship with the Middle East, given the fact that Biden was in Obama's administration when that administration did so much to pull out of the Middle East and did so much damage geopolitically as a result of it.
It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who register to vote and cast a ballot is consistently higher than the percentage of the men who do so. End of quote. Repeat the line.
How bad is Biden's decline?
It's not pretty, Andrew, and good to be with you. If you look at the latest polling, just as a barometer of it, the RCP, Real Clear Politics average poll of polls, he's at about 38% right now. That is well below the waterline of 45-50% that they say usually is a harbinger for a successful presidency and re-election. He's at 38%, looking at that average. That is lower than in recent times previous presidents at this point in their presidencies. It is lower in every single segment, whether it's Democrats overall, women, Hispanics, the black vote, which the Democrat Party heavily relies on. They're at 56%, which is really, really low. It's one of their most loyal and reliable voting blocs. So it's not looking pretty. This sets up, three scenarios. Either he does run again, because it's not to say that if he's at this level of polling at this point in his presidency, theoretically it can't be turned around. I would remind your viewers that Bill Clinton was actually at a similar rate, and he went on to, win the re-election. I think most people would agree that Biden is not Bill Clinton, but theoretically it's possible. The second scenario is he finishes out his term but steps aside, and then other people from the Democrat bench will vie for the job. And then the third scenario, which is I think what you alluded to in your editorial, is that he doesn't even finish out this term, and potentially he steps aside after the midterm elections coming up in November, which paves the way for Kamala Harris to take that top job and then vie for election. And that sets up, a whole different scenario that we have seen in U.S. history, but, it makes a lot of people very nervous.
The Democrats thought they'd get a huge polling boost when the Supreme Court knocked out Roe versus Wade. When the court said that was just a made-up law by judges allowing abortion, and that actually should be decided by politicians in the states. But the anger of the activists and the journalists does not seem to have triggered a big revolt.
Andrew, this has been fascinating to watch, and I think some of it was the Supreme Court leak took a bit of the heat out of the immediate reaction, but by the same token, that should have given the pro-choice lobby a huge run-up to say we are going to be ready for the moment that this gets overturned. There were protests across the country. There is a lot of upset around this, but when it comes to actually harnessing that, it seems like what the White House strategy was to let it play out and let that outrage, anger build and grow, and it doesn't really seem to have happened in the way that they would have hoped. And so now the criticism's been that they waited too long to do something, and they're announcing some measures now, a DOJ inquiry into how you can assist women travelling interstate. But the issue is that a lot of these states, it's really just gone back to what the status quo would have been, and they've had a decade of really powerful pro-life lobbying in those states.
As I said, back from holidays, went to Holland, visited relatives, went to London. And funnily enough, when I landed there, I didn't get the big spiel that Qantas gives when it lands in Sydney or Melbourne. You know, we acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and so on and so on. All that race stuff that makes you feel like a stranger in your own country. So I thought, going back to Holland, homeland of my parents, I'd at least get my turn at this race game. But not at all. I didn't get, we honour the elders, past and present, of the traditional Dutch tribes of this land. Or landing in Britain, didn't get, we honour the elders, past and present, of the Celtic tribes of Britain. Because that, of course, would be racist, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be welcoming to all the immigrants flooding there now. And to rub it in, when it was in London, I walked past the Australian High Commission, which is our top diplomatic post there, and found it was flying almost any flag except the Australian one. It's like we're ashamed to say that we're actually one country and one people. I took a photo, not a very good photo, excuse this. I was so surprised, you see. Our High Commission was instead flying 13 flags, and just one of them was the Australian national flag, just one. But there were 2 Aboriginal flags, 2 Torres Strait Islander flags, 2 Ukrainian flags. We actually flew more Ukrainian flags than Australian ones at the Australian High Commission. There are also 2 pride flags for everyone who isn't straight, and 4 state flags, 2 wrapped around the flagpole so you couldn't actually see what states they were. It was amazing. Our diplomats in London are shouting to the world that we're a nation of tribes divided by race or gender identity. We're not one people at all. Something is seriously wrong with the Victoria Police. It seems so politicised. I mean, just look what it did for a start to the innocent Cardinal George Pell, a Conservative. Now, to me, Victoria's police seem to treat Pell from the start as a pedophile, even advertising for so-called victims before it even had a complaint. Got an innocent man sent to jail before the High Court finally stepped in and said he was the victim of an injustice. Well, now, another example. More minor, you might say, but still very disturbing for me. And it's an example for which the police have finally apologised, although still not explained. It has apologised to a journalist, a right-wing journalist, Avi Yemeni, for 3 times now wrongly arresting him as he was trying to cover protests in Melbourne. The apology reads, on each occasion, Mr. Yemeni was wrongly arrested and detained by members of Victoria Police while reporting for Rebel News. Victoria Police sincerely apologises for the hurt and embarrassment suffered by Mr. Yemeni. And I've got to think, wait a minute, wrongly arresting the same reporter not once, not twice, but 3 times? What is going on? And why is the media so uninterested in what seems to me another example of the brutal authoritarianism of the Victorian Labor government and its minions? Joining me is Bjorn Lomborg, former director of the Danish government's Environmental Assessment Institute, president of the Copenhagen Consensus, and author of international bestsellers on global warming such as False Alarm and The Skeptical Environmentalist. Bjorn, always great to talk to you. Our Prime Minister's plan to to stop floods is to cut our emissions. You've studied the economics of global warming. Is this a smart move?
Well, you don't even need to study the economics of this. It's just simply not viable, as you point out. Look, even if Australia totally stopped all its emissions, this is not what's going to make a big difference. Of course, what will make a difference is that you have better flood defenses, you have better planning, that you have better prognoses, all of these smart things, which actually, if you go to the New South Wales website on this, they mention 9 different things, none of them which are climate. If you want to help people that are being flooded, you should obviously help them. You shouldn't try to change the weather slightly in 100 years incredibly ineffectively. It's not really rocket science.
China is like all kinds of dictatorships, really. Bullying is what it does. But bullying its own people is one thing. What China doesn't seem to get is that bullying Australia does not work. China's foreign minister last Friday finally agreed to talks with Australia and met new Foreign Minister Penny Wong after 3 years of punishing Australia with trade bans, bans on meeting ministers, and all because we defended free speech and asked for an inquiry into how this COVID virus started. But if you thought this meeting on Friday was the end of this Cold War, forget it. China has since issued 4 demands if we want to get back on track with China. First, Australia must treat the dictatorship as a partner, not adversary, and seek common ground. We must not seek to control third parties, and we must build a positive public opinion, apparently a positive one for China. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is not impressed.
Australia doesn't respond to demands, we respond to our own national interest. I'll say this, we will cooperate with China where we can. I want to build good relations with all countries, but we will stand up for Australia's interests when we must.
Mr. President, if you held a grain of sand on the tip of your finger at arm's length, that is the part of the universe that you're seeing, just one little speck of the universe. We're looking back more than 13 billion years. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second, and that light that you are seeing on one of those little specks has been traveling for over 13 billion years. And by the way, we're going back further.
Brad Tucker, what does this remarkable image actually tell us about the past of our universe and maybe even its future?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is just, as you said, that first image that was just revealed. And in it, we're seeing really not just new parts of the universe, but in a new way. So it's looking in the infrared light. So this is colors of light beyond the optical, beyond what the Hubble Space Telescope can see. And because it's so big, the Hubble Space Telescope was 2.4 meters. This is 6.5 meters. This is so much bigger. You're zooming in on things that you couldn't see before. Telescopes are like light buckets, so the bigger the bucket, the more light you can collect. And so this is the truly exciting thing, that when you see kind of those curved galaxies around in this image, these are actually galaxies behind that massive kind of cluster in the middle, kind of that hazy shade. And in fact, it's being magnified. So those little curved bits are actually 13 billion years old. The universe is only 13.8 billion years old, meaning that we're seeing things, seeing back in time that far, and a glimpse of almost the beginning of the universe.